Welcome back to the Healthy Commute. I'm Dr. Dan with Dr. Pascal. So you had a chance to do a webinar recently, and I just wanted to go over this as a podcast because I think this is information that people absolutely need. So the simple question is that how long should it take us to recover from a car accident? A lot of times we think, okay, well, like we hear that a lot from patients. Oh, it was just a very minor rear ender. I was in an accident, but I didn't feel any pain. Right? So what is happening on the inside, and should we be concerned about it?
Absolutely, and I think that was the greatest thing that I took away from this, was understanding that the majority, if not almost like 99% of injuries to the spine are missed after crashes.
Wow.
And there are a number of reasons for that.
99%.
So that was specific to disc injuries, right? Because those are probably the ones that are going to take the longest and have the most complicated long-term outcomes, right?
Yeah.
But 99% of them are missed. And the biggest reason I think that we were seeing in that, especially in that podcast, is people have the belief that, one, if there was, a small impact, I didn't get hurt. Mm-hmm. Two, was a big crash. Doc, I went to the hospital, they checked me out, and I was okay. Well, that's funny enough. That's where 99% of those disc injuries are missed. And there's a number of reasons for that, right? And the very first thing we always have to remember is that in the emergency room, the doctor's job there is not to diagnose your disc injury. It's to find out are you hemorrhaging?
Yep.
Have you dislocated anything? Have you fractured your spine? Are you going to die if I discharge you from the hospital right now?
Right.
So they do their job, and they make sure that they're clearing you out for severe hemorrhaging, dislocations, life-threatening illnesses, and they send you on your way to basically open up a bed for the next person coming in to make sure that they're not going to die.
And just to clarify, right, they're doing their job
perfectly,
at the best of
100%.
Their abilities. They are amazing at what they do.
Yeah.
But really at this point, their job is not to ensure that you will thrive for the next 30, 40, 50 years of your life. Their job at that point is, will you be able to survive these next little while?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we take that kind of check mark of, oh, we could survive, great, I'm perfect, I'm going to be great. No, you're just okay and you're not going to die. But there's a massive difference between thriving and surviving.
And the problem is with that, Dr. Dan, the problem is that they use that data coming out of those hospitals to build sort of like, data tables to tell people how quickly they should get well and how often they're injured. And so there's this massive misconception in the insurance industry, in the health-related world as well, of a much smaller number of injuries than that actually happen in a car crash, right? And so, 99% of them are getting missed. Well, it seems like the risk or the incidence of injury is actually quite low. And then, you have to think about some of these injuries. They take 2 weeks sometimes to peak in terms of how bad you're going to feel and how for the inflammation to come in. It's not always like instant where like I'm hit and then the pain is severe and I have this injury and it's caught right away. And so there's a delay, there's a lag, and that's a big reason it's not caught at the hospital. So those are the two biggest reasons, I think. Number one, that a lot of these injuries are missed and that there's a misconception, right? One, I was hit at a low speed. Two, they checked me out at the hospital and I was good, so I don't have an injury.
Right.
Those two big misconceptions cause us significant problems long-term to those people that are injured.
So first, let's talk about the injury. So
Yes.
The one word that we hear a lot is whiplash.
Correct.
Right? I was diagnosed with whiplash. We use it, right? And what exactly, or if we could clarify maybe the difference of what whiplash is,
Yeah.
and how it affects us.
So whiplash is a mechanism of injury. Right? So it'd be like saying whiplash is not a diagnosis. It doesn't talk about tissue injuries, right? It's just the mechanism by which the spine was injured.
It's describing how
a specific injury to the spine, meaning the spine, when it gets hit from the front or from the side, the spine takes this very unique configuration, causes a change to the shape to the ligaments and the joints in the spine, and because of it, there can be injuries that result. Okay? Now, those injuries could be as simple as what we often hear, and probably the most common blanket association with whiplash is sprain strain, meaning you've aggravated the muscles and the tendons, the ligaments in the neck. You rest for 6 weeks, you should be good. That is the most common what we're told across the board, right? Like, let it rest for 6 weeks, it should be good.
And that, just so that we don't go over that too fast, that's a general understanding, even within some of even our association and the medical association as well, thinking that, okay, after an injury, you should be back to your normal self within, give or take, let's say 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
But this is far from the truth. Now, just to differentiate, 6 to 8 weeks, your symptoms may improve with care.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. But is it back to square one or back to your best self?
Right. And so that would be a best case scenario. Okay,
Yes.
so to answer the question, like if we're going to answer the question for people, how long should it take to recover from a crash? Well, on the short end, if it's just a sprain strain,
Yeah.
we're going to say 6 weeks. If it's a disc injury now, if it's a significant disc injury or an upper cervical instability where there's ligament damage, ligament tearing, facet damage, disc injury, we're talking lifelong problems, lifelong disability, and we see that over and over and over again. And so there's numerous references in the literature to these lifelong problems, and they call it disability.
Right. And this is, I think we have to clarify a little bit. So what do we mean by lifelong changes?
Okay, so lifelong means like one, chronic pain. Chronic pain would probably be the number one, right? And so, people bend their head forward, there's pain, or they're limited, they can't move their neck as well because of those ligament injuries.
Yeah.
And so one is going to be affected in your ability to move your neck, so range of motion goes down.
Yeah.
Two, the pain, the chronic pain
Yeah.
is there all the time. And because of that chronic pain, you're limited in activities that you could do. For instance, you might not be able to lift weights the same, you can't pick up your grandkids. And so what they call health-related quality of life, that's kind of the short term, HRQOL, goes down in almost across every single facet. Almost, I can't say lifelong, but years. There's lots of research that shows 7 years after an accident, numerous factors in the health-related quality of life go down for people that have been injured in a crash.
But the other key thing is there's a true injury that will never be back to normal. It's almost like,
Correct.
let's say if you've had, in your teenage years, playing soccer, playing a sport, and you have a very severe, let's say, sprain, strain in your ankle or knee, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times they say a sprain or strain sometimes is worse than a break because a break is the bone can heal better than soft tissue. So let's say if we're talking about the neck in a whiplash case, car accident. Now we have permanent changes to the ligaments and muscles, which will, even with care, will improve, but will never
Maybe
be
never totally
back to its original state. So now the stability of the spine is never the same. And then that's when we also could talk about now if there's the stability or the position of your spine when you had that accident.
Correct.
Right? So now sometimes we hear, oh, well, I was in a car with a friend of mine, but I don't understand why for them they barely got hurt. And for me, it was kind of like I was in so much pain. So why could you help people understand that point?
Well, let's just before we get into that, Dr. Dan, that's a perfect tie-in to talk about some of those injuries. So some of those ligament instabilities, those injuries that we're talking about, some of those could be a loss of a neck curve, which is probably one of the most common ones. So for those of you listening, if this is new to you, you should have a C-shaped arc in your neck, okay? A C-shaped arc. And so when you get hit from behind, from the side, and there's a whiplash injury, one of the most common things is a loss of that curve, okay? And the loss of that curve can be one of the reasons why you have years of pain afterwards, facet joint injuries, disc injuries, even so much so now they're looking into blood flow to the brain, blood flow injuries. So you're actually damaging the arteries in the neck as well, affecting blood flow. So this is beyond just ligaments and tendons, right? So one of those complicating factors is now altered positioning, altered mechanics of the spine. And if that's not fixed, that's part of the long-term issues or problems. And so that's one of the goals of care is to put the curve back in the spine to protect it, support it, and reduce those other injuries, okay? So now we get into your question, Dr. Dan, of why could two people be in a car crash and have different outcomes? Well, let's say you have a great neck curve because, you've maintained it, you've been working on it for life. My neck curve is straight. I've lost my curve, or even worse, my neck curve is reversed, which, by the way, probably 70% of people have these days because of technology.
Yeah.
Tons of people are coming into our offices with these necks that are already extremely unstable in the wrong position. And so you and me, you have a good neck curve. I have a reverse neck curve. If we're in a car crash, I'm in big trouble. You're going to get away with potentially the 6 weeks of sprain strain.
Yeah.
I'm going to have up to 7 years, even multiple years of disc injuries, potentially fractures of my end plates, and so on and so forth, because I am unstable to start with.
So almost like if we had two homes. One had this rock solid foundation, pillars into the rock, super stable, right? The walls are beautifully kind of engineered to kind of support that weight. The other house is maybe a 80-year-old house with unstable structure, and all of a sudden there's a little, let's say, earthquake. So which house will be able to support that, better? Right? One will crumble
Yes.
because of it's not stable versus the other one.
And,
Same thing for the neck.
And the bad foundation one, the house is going to crumble, the effects will be felt everywhere. Right? It's going to go everywhere. And so that's kind of the idea behind it is Norris and Watt in the Whiplash Disability Manual, they talk about people that have a reversal of their cervical curve are suffering pain and disability not a year, years after the injury, right? It's pretty serious stuff for people that are in car accidents, especially if their neck isn't healthy.
And I always worry about, especially those, and it's great to be young, and I think a lot of times the injuries that they feel is less than if someone would be older, but the effects are still the same. So if you're in your early 20s getting into an accident, well, that damage could literally be impacting you for the rest of your life. And right now, all you're thinking about is, hey, it's not too bad. I'm more worried about my car.
Right.
Well, it should literally be the opposite. The car could get fixed.
Absolutely.
You could get a new bumper. Things could basically be restored even better than before.
Yeah.
But your spine and body are completely different. So you should be really concerned about that. But speaking of that, what should someone look for in terms of, well, what's a proper exam? How do we know how the injuries are impacting me? Do I have injuries?
Right.
What do I need to do?
Right. And so that's a great question because, you might get cleared at the hospital saying there's nothing wrong, you're good to go. Again, they're life-saving injuries. They're not like looking for these small ligament instabilities. And the reality is, one, you need a proper exam. Okay? And if you're wondering maybe would you need it, it's very simple. If you were in a car accident, should you get examined? Blanket statement, yes, 100%. Number two is if you have any pain following the accident, that's number one red flag already, get checked. If you have pain and you have pain with movement, secondary red flag. Okay, that's even worse than just pain. So if you move your neck around and there's more pain, you're likely to have, again, more injuries to the spine. If you have pain, that's worse with movement, and that pain travels anywhere, extra red flag. So you could just literally turn your head from side to side, bend your head side to side, move your neck up and down. If any of those cause you discomfort or more discomfort, those are simple indications that there might be, a facet injury, a ligament tear, a ligament rupture, or a disc injury. Now the reality is you can go in, you come into our office, we'll look at those things and I'll touch those areas and say, yeah, it looks like there's this injury. But without taking films, without taking x-rays, or even better would be something like video fluoroscopy, which I don't think we have in Manitoba, to find out where are those ligaments injured. And you want to get those properly identified as soon as possible and start working on them, right? And unfortunately, working on them is not like 4 or 5 visits. We started looking at cases that they were presenting this weekend on that webinar, and they were talking about cases that were going 100 to 200 visits just to stabilize the spine from the injuries in these car crashes. Right? Wow. And a lot of these were not like they were crazy impact crashes where these people are hospitalized. Not at all. Yeah. It's just these cases where the neck was straight. The person had a kyphotic, a bad neck going into the injury. And so they're left with significant injuries, instabilities to the spine. And it takes that long to regain proper stability to the spine, right? And so in Manitoba, being in a public healthcare system or public insurance, you get into an accident, whether your car is totaled or your fender bender, right, you're getting 20 visits, right? 20 visits to help get you back to normal. And that 20 visits, a couple times a week, you're looking at really the 6 to 8 weeks type of mentality where you get a minor strain sprain. And if that's the case, maybe those 20 visits will help you get back. But
could that help you, let's say, with your symptoms, right?
Sure.
Yes, sure. It could definitely affect, you feel better, all function better, that's great. But the same thing is that, are you, back to original or better than what you first started?
No way.
And it takes more time.
Yeah, and if there's a disc injury, if there's a true facet injury, and if there's a true ligament instability, those 20 visits are going to help maybe bring your pain down, but they'll have done nothing to stabilize the area, and they'll have done nothing to get you back to where you need to be or protect you long term. And again, you're not going to know that unless you get a proper exam with a full set of x-rays to see, where are those instabilities happening, and then have someone who knows how to properly restructure a spine to gain that stability back. Because if you don't restructure the spine, if you lost your curve and you leave a straight neck, whether the pain goes away or not, that straight neck is still problematic next year, 10 years, 20 years down the road.
Will continue to break down.
Absolutely.
So a few years ago, we did let's say our top 5 things to know after a car accident. So just because we're on that subject, let's just review the top 5 things to kind of know. So the first one is it doesn't take a lot of force to create ligament and spinal damage. So a lot of times, like you were just saying, you know, like sometimes we expect it, oh, it has to be a 100-mile-an-hour head-on collision to cause damage. No, it could literally, you know, 10 to 15 kilometers an hour will cause ligament instability into the spine.
And that was a study out of Yale.
Yep.
Aging increases the risk of injuries of whiplash, right? And we talked about this, and I think we just covered this almost ad nauseum, but the reality is it's not necessarily just the age of the spine, it's because generally there's pre-existing, there's more multiple injuries, right? Straighter necks going the wrong way. Then you start adding stiff areas, so those areas don't move the same. And so basically what happens is the more, you know, these minor injuries pile up in a spine, the more the spine becomes weaker and stable, the more likely you are to get injured. So someone that's really young could be injured as well, but more likely than not throughout life, we accumulate these little instabilities, injuries, and that person is much more likely to get hurt as they get older. Okay.
Number 3 was you shouldn't shrug off symptoms, meaning number 1, sometimes people get symptoms right away. Sometimes it takes a week or 2 or 3 to kind of start symptoms, but symptoms should not be the primary indicator as is if you should get checked or not. Like we talked about before, regardless, you should get a checkup as soon as possible. Number 1, to figure out the integrity and the stability of your spine to make sure things obviously don't progress and to get things back on track as soon as possible.
Absolutely, and I think that one of the biggest things there to understand is if you do have any instability, meaning there's true ligament damage in your spine, the faster you start doing something to correct it, the lower the complications are going to be lifelong, right? And the faster you're going to heal. It's that simple. But if you leave it there for 6 weeks hoping it's going to get better, there's a lot of damage. It's going to take much longer to get you back on track.
And number 4?
When it comes to whiplash, rest equals rust, right? You want to move. So basically, if you've had a whiplash type injury, right? And then here's where it becomes very specific though, right? We have to know where you injured because you don't want to keep moving your spine into the injured area, but you want to be doing motion to the spine because the longer you let your spine stay immobile, the more likely you are to stiffen up in these bad positions. The more likely you are to build scar tissue in these bad positions. So we want to get your spine moving as quick as possible into non-painful ranges of motion, basically.
Exactly. Okay. And number 5 is, you know, what do I do after, you know, an accident? Like we talked about a few times. Just the quickest thing is just get a checkup, schedule a proper exam and x-rays to understand exactly what's going on before things, you know, get worse over time.
And I think everybody knows the drill of, you know, collect information from the other drivers, so on and so forth. If you're sore anywhere, put ice that day. Instantly put ice anywhere you're sore just to help decrease inflammation. And make sure that when you submit your claim, because again, we're always worried about the damage to the car, even if you don't feel any pain, get a bodily injury number if that accident was above 13 kilometers an hour, because there is a chance your ligaments, your spine was injured. Have that there in case you need it, and regardless, like you said, you should get checked.
And so there's a lot of information here we covered. So number 1, you have any questions, any comments, anything else, give us a call here, 204-474-1159. Send us an email, info@lindenwoodschiropractic.com. Or number 3 is just physically come in and get that checkup so that you could understand exactly what's going on with your spine and what could be done.
Yes, absolutely.
So hopefully that could help you a little bit understand the effects of an accident. And hopefully that helped you a little bit. So again, enjoy the rest of your healthy commute.